So, a bit of backstory. I'm an 18-year-old female from the UK. This happened in February of 2019, and I was 16 at the time. I got set up on a semi-blind date. We had seen photos of each other by a mutual friend, and this guy that we will call Cameron. He was 19. Cameron seemed like your average guy, maybe a little bit too into video games and anime and stuff, but overall nothing my friend told me about him seemed off in any way. Our mutual friend gave us each other's numbers and we texted for a night and decided to meet in a Starbucks the next day, since we both were free from work. I never like to meet new people this soon, but I figured since Cameron knew my friend, it couldn't possibly go wrong. How mistaken I was. I arrived slightly early, ordered my coffee since I never like guys to feel like they have to buy for me, and I parked up on a seat facing away from the door and I pulled out my book. I may be there for 15 minutes just chilling out and I get a text saying that he's here. So I'm like, great, and I tell him what table I'm at. I feel a presence over my shoulder and I turn my head slightly in acknowledgement. He must be here. Before I even get a chance to squeak out a hello, his lips latch onto my neck and he starts sucking at my neck. Now I don't like people touching my neck at the best of times. I'm very ticklish and I get super uncomfortable by people even touching it. The few times that I've had massages or hair treatments, I've been holding in my discomfort. And he's latched onto my neck like a leech. And this man smells horrendous, kind of like dust personified. I freak out and elbow his chest to get him the heck off of me. He lets go and looks at me with this weird expression on his face and laughs in deadpan. It's really creepy and I start to become alarmed. I ask him what the heck that was and he just says, I thought it was cute. Cute? In what world? I try to have a conversation. I'm like, okay, first impressions don't mean anything. Let's try and give him a chance. But he's just creepily staring at my chest. He says, wow, I didn't know Asians could have boobs like those. I'd better not let you go. That's a direct quote. I cannot make this up. I'm distinctly uncomfortable, but I don't want to just run away. He's giving me really weird vibes. So I go into the ladies' bathroom and wait for someone else to come in. I ask her to help me out, get undetected. I don't want this man following me home or some stuff like that. She of course agrees and she lends me her hat and scarf. It is February in the UK after all. And we come out of the bathroom together and she manages to help me sneak out of the back door, out of the Starbucks without him ever noticing me. He asked my friend where I went, but I told my friend to never mention me again. I was too terrified and I know I probably didn't behave well. I should have just told him that I was leaving, but I was honestly just scared of him. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 14 and my sister was 18. My dad is an avid fisherman who loves fishing in the middle of nowhere simply because there aren't any other people around. For this particular fishing trip, we went to a state park in Georgia, a couple of hours away from where we lived. After about an hour down a mixture of dirt and gravel road, we arrived at a pretty large clearing where we parked at. We got out and walked down a hill to a small waterfall with a pool of water at the bottom. The river before the waterfall was very shallow. The details of the area are kind of important. When we arrived, we had lunch by the river and we started fishing. We were there for about an hour when I started to get bored, and I went back to the car that was parked nearby for some water. On my way back to my dad, I noticed a man standing just behind the tree line of the clearing, about 30 feet away from our car. Thinking that it was weird, I hurried back to my dad and I told him. By the time that I told him, we all looked back and the guy was already standing above us on top of the hill. This man gave us all a very weird vibe from the start. He was in his late 20s and stood about 6 foot. He wasn't an overly broad person, but he was far taller than my dad. He was dressed in an army uniform, although it honestly looked like a Halloween costume. The most noticeable part about him was the machete that he was holding. My dad, remaining calm, started to strike up a conversation with him and asking if he was fishing here too. The man just stared at us for about a minute before answering that he was waiting for his friends to come by in a boat so that he could pick them up. He had no car with him, no trailer, and he was at the base of a waterfall. Yeah, a really good story there. My dad at this point was very concerned, even though he kept very calm. While chatting to the guy about arbitrary things, he was slowly packing up all of our stuff and putting himself between the man and his children. The man didn't respond much, just standing there being very twitchy and restless. In about 20 minutes, my dad had managed to move us slowly up the hill and back to our car. When we started making motions to leave, however, the man started getting aggressive. He suddenly started talking about his time in the military and how this high school sweetheart had left him for another. His eyes got wild after mentioning his ex-girlfriend, and he turned his attention to my sister. He started yelling about how women were awful and would always be unworthy of a man's attention, all while leering at my sister and stabbing the ground repeatedly with his machete. At this point, my dad decided that we needed to go and motioned for my sister and I to get in the car before he followed and locked the doors. We got out of there in a hurry as the guy watched us leave before going back into the trees. This guy has become a bit of a joke in our family, as we have dubbed him the Machete Man, but that experience will always stick with me. My dad admits that was the one time where he truly wished that he had had a gun, because his only weapon at the time was a pair of scissors. At the time of this story, I was 21 and living in a major Midwestern city, attending university there. Having lived there for only 1 month before my story began, I had witnessed a train stop stabbing and been yelled at by a crackhead, had a homeless guy follow me and threaten to choke me outside the physics building on campus, and watched a 13-car cop raid on a drug house just across the street. The area around the university is known for being rough and has a notoriously high crime rate. We would get a few text messages a week from the campus police, saying things like there had been a robbery, a break-in, an assault, stalkings, attempted kidnappings, and so on. I always ignored these texts, thinking foolishly that I would never be a victim because I was smart enough to stay out of trouble, not to go out alone late at night, all the cliches. I seriously regret this behavior now, and to anyone listening to this, please never think that you're 100% safe, no matter how prepared you are. Always do your best to stay observant and careful. The first incident wasn't too unusual. It was just a block or two from my apartment building one day in the early evening. It was still light outside at the time, and I was walking my dog, Sesame, a cute doge who just looks like a fluffy, goofy puppy, and has never been frightening or very protective in his life. As I was heading back home, I passed a small parking lot, and in it was a very large van. I could see a man in his early 60s sitting in the driver's seat smoking a cigarette. He was staring at me. As I passed, he actually leaned out of his car and called out to me, "Hey, you there. It's a cute dog. What's his name?" I should mention this isn't even my first story like this. I have a pretty intense fear of strangers and actually struggle with PTSD from other incidents in my life. Being pretty wary for this reason, I ignored him and just continued walking faster. I had a car door shut behind me and turned quickly to see that he had gotten out of his van, and he was slowly walking toward me. He called out to me again, "Hey, I just want to see your dog, come back." His phrasing upset me, and I gripped my dog's leash and started to speed walk away from him, starting to feel nervous. My heart was beginning to pound, but I kept telling myself over and over that I was overreacting, and it was just my paranoia acting up, and there was nothing to worry about. Boy, was I wrong. I managed to turn the corner and was about to cross the final park before getting to my apartment. In my fear over the van guy, I wasn't paying attention as much as I usually do to what was in front of me. I looked back over my shoulder and the guy had stopped, following me. He was, however, standing in the middle of the sidewalk with a huge, creepy grin on his face. I whirled back around with my eyes glued to my building. I only needed to walk another half a block and I'd be home. I was going to get away from him and his creepy van. Just when I thought that I was safe, a group of 5 or 6 men came from the side of the park that I wasn't watching. They were all tall and intimidating in stature, and all of them were laughing and looking right at me. Out of the corner of my eye, the van guy had started walking towards me as well. I remember that he was whistling. I again picked up my pace and desperately searched for my keys in my pocket as I hurried to the door. The group of men had veered towards me, partially cutting me off, and in all my stupid politeness, I stopped. They grinned at me with sick, perverted smiles, obviously checking me out, looking up and down my body, and it made me sick. I tried not to panic and I inched closer to my apartment. "Hey, what's your name? Where are you going? What's your number? Is that your apartment? Can we come over? Do you smoke?" They all barraged me with questions one after another. I tried to refuse them, stammering, "No thank you," as I saw the van guy come and join the group, leering at me. While I inched away, they inched closer. One of them then reached out for me, his fingers actually touching my arm. I leapt back, trying not to start crying, but Sesame suddenly lunged at them, his teeth bared, a horrifying snarl ripping from his throat. Every bit of his cute personality was gone, and he looked like he wanted to tear one of these guys' throats out. It startled them enough that I was able to turn and sprint the final distance to my building, locking the door behind me. I fell to the floor inside my building, hugging Sesame. However, the entire front of the building was glass, and to my horror and disbelief, the group of men came and stood in front of the windows, grinning at me, laughing, and making kissy faces and lewd gestures at me. The apartment manager came out and called the cops on them, but they ran away. I made it back home and I scrubbed myself in the shower, crying and shaking with fear. Sesame got a special dinner that evening, and I kept telling myself that they just wanted to mess with me, and that I was never in any real danger. It's stupid of me, I now know. About a month later, when I had finally managed to be able to walk outside my apartment without severe anxiety, I was actually planning on moving a bit further away from campus. I was still going to be in a sketchy neighborhood, but the thought of those men knowing where I lived kept me up at night. My apartment actually hired a security guard to be there 24/7, after somebody had broken into the building and smashed all the windows, destroyed some of the furniture, and stolen a bunch of bicycles. Of course, my bike was one of them. Anyways, I was headed home from class and it was a beautiful day. I actually felt pretty happy for once and I popped my earbuds in on the last few blocks before I got home. Again, stupid, I know. After a block or so, I started to feel like somebody was watching me. My palms started sweating. I glanced behind me, trying not to look obvious, and a tall man was about 20 feet behind me, staring straight ahead. I snapped my head back around and ripped out my earbuds. No, I thought. It can't be one of them. I was jumping to conclusions given my anxiety disorder and paranoia surely, but there was something familiar about him. My heart started racing, as I hoped to God the others weren't waiting for me around the corner of my building, ready to jump me. I walked faster, wishing that Sesame was with me. I was too afraid to look back at him as I fumbled with my keys and wrenched the door open as hard as I could. This turned out to be a crucial mistake. As I ran to the elevator trying to breathe a sigh of relief, I saw with absolute horror that the man had caught the door that I had thrown wide open and was slowly coming into the building with me. He paused, standing away from me, but close enough that I could hear his ragged breathing and the smell of alcohol coming off him. My heart was thudding in my chest now, and I struggled to think clearly. The apartment manager was already home for the day, and I was completely alone in the lobby. There were no other doors out of that room, and the stranger was blocking my way to the door. The security guard supposed to be keeping an eye on the building was nowhere to be seen. The elevator came and I tried to run into it and slam my hand over the door close button as fast as I could. I pushed my floor button and huddled in the far corner of the elevator. I started to once again try to catch my breath. But right when the door was almost closed, he stuck his hand in. I couldn't believe it. He waited until the door was just about to close and then he stopped it. He was standing close enough that there was no way that was a mistake. My stomach dropped and a suffocating sense of dread crept in. I kept my head down as he joined me. My desperate hope that he was just a dirty, drunken resident of the building was dashed away when he didn't press any buttons. I don't know why I didn't run out of the elevator or try to leave the building again. I was paralyzed with fear, and all I could do was watch as the door closed and sealed my fate. The elevator was filled with the stench of alcohol and BO. If I wasn't so terrified, I might have gagged. It was nauseating and I couldn't look at him. I couldn't move. I tried to scream at myself in my head to press the wrong button and to try to escape from him, but I was completely petrified. He leaned closer to me and I heard him breathe in deeply and very quietly sigh, like he was content. I felt tears well in my eyes, and the seconds that it took to reach the top floor where I lived felt like hours. I saw no way that I could escape the sick drunk guy who was smelling me. In the reflection of the elevator walls, I could make out his disgusting smile. He was staring directly at me, his hands in his pockets, clearly holding on to something. I'm not religious, but I prayed that I would make it to my door in time. I realized that he probably wasn't going to attack me in the elevator. There was a large camera in the ceiling. I looked up at it, feeling a tear spill out of my eye as I did so, hoping that whoever saw the tape eventually would identify this man. The worst part of all of this is that I've trained in martial arts and self-defense since I was about 8 years old. I thought of myself as stronger and braver than I was acting. I should know what to do. I should be strong enough to do it. But no matter how many times I disarmed, thrown, or choked out attackers in the studio, nothing totally prepares you for the dread of a real-life situation. As the elevator reached my floor, I managed to snap out of my stupor long enough to dash through the door and run to my apartment unit. I nearly missed the keyhole, but I threw open my door. I was nearly through when my backpack snagged on the outside handle of the door, trapping me. I heard the man walking quickly to my door, a low chuckle building in his throat as he watched me panic and struggle to get free. I felt like a mouse being watched by a cat, trapped and helpless so close to escaping. I finally gave up and shoved my arms through the straps, abandoning the backpack. As I did so, the man suddenly reached out for me, but I was able to slam the door shut, deadbolting it. The gust of air from the door slamming brought his disgusting smell in with me, and in my terror and disgust, I retched violently. I looked through the peephole. He was staring right at me, pressing his forehead against the door. His mouth bent into a furious scowl. He swore at me and ripped my backpack off the handle of the door, slamming it to the ground. I winced as I heard my laptop thud. I was still too terrified to say anything, but I grabbed the knife I kept by the door in my hand, ready if he tried anything. After a few minutes of staring at my door and jiggling the handle, licking the peephole and making obscene motions at it, he unzipped my backpack, dumping its contents on the floor. He picked up my bag, sniffing it, and leering at the peephole as he did so, like he knew that I was watching him. I couldn't look away, again paralyzed in fear. Finally, he left, using the elevator visible from my door like nothing had happened. I continued to stare at the peephole for what felt like an eternity and then finally called the apartment manager, feeling my anger sinking in that the security guard hadn't been anywhere in sight and not paying attention. It turns out that he had fallen asleep eating Taco Bell and watching movies on his phone. He was only about 10 feet away from the elevator the entire time, sleeping in the office behind a closed door. They fired him, but the creepy guy was never caught, and neither were any of the others. I don't even know for sure if this man was a part of the original group. I was honestly too terrified to look much at their faces during the first incident. I moved out of my apartment a week later, staying with my boyfriend at the time for the remainder of my lease, and keeping Sesame with me at all times when possible. A few more things happened while I lived in that city, from having to call in a gunfight from outside my new apartment window, to having to pick up my friend who was being followed by a van, to having to evacuate during an arson incident. There are nice things about that city too, but during my time there, besides learning the police department was absolutely useless and corrupt, to nearly escaping with my life multiple times, I couldn't be happier to be far, far away from there, and doing a lot better with my fear and anxiety.